Welcome to Reorganizing Employee Maintenance. This is the online recording of the UN webinar titled Restructuring Employee Setup to Maximize Efficiency. As you can see, I have a booklet on the screen, and it's about 18 pages long. You want to make sure that you get a printed copy of this booklet on hand before you watch the rest of this webinar, or online recording, I should say. So you can pause the video and go to the UN link website under online recordings, and right next to the link for this webinar, you'll find a link to the handout which you can print. All right, so on this handout, I'll move to the first page, and I think I'm going to need to zoom in a little bit here. I'll give you an idea of the direction that we're going today. All right, the goal of this lesson is to show you how to restructure your employee setup, not necessarily common employee changes. There is another webinar and online recording that will be posted, or maybe is posted at the time that you're watching this, that goes over common changes like adding new withholdings to employees, or making pay rate changes. Common changes you might encounter like that. Maybe a current employee is now qualify for leave, or is moving from a part-time position to a full-time position, and there are some changes that are needed. That is covered in a different recording and webinar. The focus of this class is on restructuring based on changes that were implemented with the UN software back in 2012, and that were rolled out, so to speak, in 2013 for all of our customers. So if you're a newer fiscal officer, if you started in 2014 or 15, you may not be aware that in January of 2013, UN introduced a brand new version of our software that was completely based on different programming than the previous version, and sort of a different background structure and philosophy that vastly improved the efficiency and organization of employee settings for payroll. Now, having said that, I should say it had the potential of significantly increasing the time it takes to make changes for ongoing maintenance and to employee settings, because it's a potential. When the software update applied to January 2013, and so our customers at that time had to do payroll in January. It's a very busy time of year, so we could not force people to reorganize according to the new concepts that are more efficient at a busy time like that. They had to make payroll for their employees. So what we did was convert their current, at that time, the current software to the new software so that it would work, and it still works, but we encouraged our customers to reorganize to take advantage of these many efficiencies in the new structure of the software. Understandably, a lot of fiscal officers did not do that immediately at the beginning of 2013, simply because obviously it's a busy time of year, and for some it could have been a lot of work. At least they thought it might have been a lot of extra work. So that was fine. At that time we provided them with an employee checklist that would aid in this process. And so that's what we're going to go over today. What we found is that a lot of our customers never did do that reorganization, restructuring if you want to call it, or clean up, as I call it, of the old employee settings. So that's the topic for today. Even if you didn't begin this recording thinking that's what you're getting into, you may find some benefit as we will go through, and maybe the reorganization's already been done at your particular entity, but you may find some benefit in the review of the employee settings and just basically the design, the intended design of the payroll software and settings. But yes, so we've reintroduced, again, the employee checklist, and that comprises about 9 pages. The core of it's really about 7 to 8 pages long, starting on page 6. And then I've added some introductory material and some extra notes about those who have leave benefits, some special considerations at the end. All right, so I'll briefly go over some of the information in the preparation section of this booklet first. Now, first of all, a good idea is to print this Employee General Information Report, and I'll demonstrate going to that report later. But this Employee General Information Report will display everything for that particular employee's settings on a printed report and show you all the relationships between the various items, like their earnings and perhaps hourly earnings or salary earnings, and the relationship between those and their withholding deductions, if they have leave benefits or overtime benefits. It shows all that on paper. So it's a good idea to print a before you make any changes and then afterwards. And we'll see there's many benefits of printing that off. We'll get to that. The next part B is to examine the reports and maintenance forms before editing. So like it says in the underline here, using the reports as a guide, first review those with the simplest setup situation, then progress to the more complicated employees. So you want to get, basically, if you've never really navigated or you don't have a need to do it very often, navigate through the employee setup, this is a good exercise, having that printout, seeing, okay, what I see on the screen, how it relates to on the report, and just reviewing the information and that'll help you with your decision-making progress. Now this next section, letter C, evaluate department and position names, is very important, and it's a couple pages long, and I encourage you to read through this thoroughly. We are going to hit on these points as we go through some examples, but that's not a real substitute for reading through the next few pages on this. So I highly encourage you to read that to get a firm understanding of that before you make any changes to any of your employees for this purpose. So for right now, I will just kind of scroll through that because I want to show you another section for reference. The screen navigation section of this booklet is especially helpful for those who maybe you're a fiscal officer that started 3 months ago on the job and you've spent very little time navigating through the employee list and the maintenance settings. This will help you as a reference as you go through that process. At first, you it's some of it's sort of the connections are abstract, and you have to get used to moving through the different various screens. So that's why, again, it's important to have that report in front of you, and then you can refer back to this. The nice thing about the various screens, as we'll see, is that they're labeled with icons to help you navigate through the main forms and the sub-forms that will come up. As you see, the various tab pages within the main form, like the earnings tab, has a symbol. And so and some of these, in some of the forms, you'll see the same item from a different perspective. So in the earnings form, you may have a tab that shows you the withholdings. It's not the main place where you will make changes to the withholdings. It simply shows you the relationship between the earning and the withholdings that are attached to it for deduction. Same thing with the other items. Really, the main thing is that most of the other items, whether it's overtimes, leaves, non-cash benefits, or withholdings, are all attached or assigned to the main component of an employee's setup, which is their earnings. And so each of them has a label for the subform. And so, like for instance, when you're in the withholdings tab, you can actually, within the holdings subform, you can look at a tab page within that withholding that'll show you earnings and the relationship between, okay, this is if I'm in an OPRS withholding, PRS withholding, it'll show me a tab showing which earning will that OPRS be deducted from, for example. All right. The next point is just, it kind of hit on a couple times in this booklet, focus on one employee at a time. You do not want to halfway make the changes for one employee. Now you can implement a reorganization of an employee setup for one employee at a time and then continue on with your normal payroll with a combination of employees that have been reorganized and those that have not been reorganized. What you don't want to do is halfway reorganize a couple, 5 different employees. You'll end up creating problems for yourself if you do that. So when you're actually making the change, evaluating and making the changes, you want to focus on one employee, and when you start those changes, follow them through all the way through the 9 pages of the checklist and complete that. Now I mentioned the 9 pages of the checklist. I recognize that is a lot of pages if you've got 50, 100 employees to go through those 9 pages for each employee. And I can see how that would not be practical. But what I encourage you to do is, again, start with your simplest employee, what you perceive as the simplest setup, and walk through the checklist with that employee, maybe a couple of employees that have fairly simple settings, and not a lot of benefits, no leaves or leave benefits and so forth, no major complications, the ones that have the least complications, and get a feel for the screens, the subforms, like I said, and for the goal of this checklist. So at some point it should come together for you as you move through a few of these employees. And then if you've got 50 and you got 20 that are all basically the same thing, you don't need, at that point you'll feel comfortable with doing this. But this checklist is very well thought through, and the order that it takes you through will reduce the amount of potential confusion that you would have by making changes and then, if done out of order, it can create situations where you may have a hard time seeing, what to do next. Whereas this will help you see all the items and reduce the amount of confusion there. So, and the other point being, if for your complicated employees, absolutely go through the checklist with them, at least the first one of that type, so that you hit all the points in that order. All right, well, for now that's enough time in the book. Let's take a look at the software. I've got the UN software open and the payroll module selected. And so I'm going to start with a simple example under payroll maintenance. So go to the maintenance section to maintain our employees, and specifically our employee list is under employees. All of these menu paths I'm going to refer to are in your book, the steps to access this. So we've got our employee list, and I'm going to start with simple SAM, and we're going to focus on the probably the most important elements for SAM. Now, I've kind of pounded the drum regarding going through the employee maintenance checklist. However, for class demonstration purposes, it's not the best approach to follow the checklist to first introduce the screen to you. in this training environment. So having said all that about the checklist, you know, in this case, don't do as I say, because this is to introduce this navigating through software for those who have never really gone through the maintenance screen. And we're going to focus just on, again, those two of the most important aspects of this. Next, after Sam, we'll get into an employee that's a lot more complicated, and we will follow the checklist step by step with her setup. All right, so for simple Sam, I check mark. Actually, what I would have done is printed that employee information report first, and then I would go and edit. So I'll click on edit, and then we have two options, guided and advanced. And I'll just say there's more of this in the book, but for reorganizing, I really encourage you to always use the advanced option when you go to edit in the screen. So it's the best option to moving around within the software in this case. So we'll select edit advanced, and that opens up Simple Sam on the screen here. Notice that, okay, it's got his name and ID at the top. It's got that little symbol. This means it tells you at a quick glance you're in the main edit employee screen. For this employee, shows their settings. This would correspond to the report, general information report. There's several tab pages going across the screen. Now the first two tabs, information and additional information, those are fairly obvious. They're just referring to like street address information, social security number, and various other settings. In step 1 and 2 of the checklist, 1 and 2 actually, particularly step 2, it says, okay, go ahead and review this information. Hey, while you're doing this reorganization, you might as well make sure you can review this for accuracy, this page for accuracy. But that's not really the focus of what you're reorganizing. So we'll move past those to the earnings tab. Now notice there are all kinds of earnings here, and all kinds of tab pages here to the right. Remember I mentioned that everything focuses around the earnings. That's the various positions and the pay setup for your employee. So all of the other items to the right of earnings must be connected to the earnings that you're paying. They're maintained separately, like overtimes, non-cash leaves, and withholdings, but everything must be attached, assigned, connected to the earning if it's going to be included as part of their payroll. Now for Sam, again, is simple. So if we look at overtimes, he doesn't have any overtime benefits, no non-cash benefits, no leave benefits. He does have withholdings, but they're very limited, right? State, federal, Medicare, and OPERS. So now just because the withholding is on this list does not mean it's linked to or assigned to an earning. This is just all the potential withholdings that Sam could have for the various earnings. Okay, it'll list them here. We have to dig deeper to see the relationships and what's attached, assigned to what. So I'm going to click back on the earnings since that's our main focus. From here we can see that Sam has 3 sets of earnings. Now each earning, there's a great deal of more detail. If we were to edit this or display it, there's a great deal more detail included with each of these earnings. But just from a glance, we can see that there's a lot in common with all of these earnings. For instance, they're all hourly wages. Now with cemetery, it happens to be renamed to cemetery, the description. The description, if we look, corresponds to the type here in UEN. If it's a 2000, 2001, 2 type, it means it's an hourly wages, and we'll see in that more detail later. If it's a 1000 or 1001, 2, 3, it's going to be a salary, etc. So one thing is they're all the same type of earning. They're all hourly earnings. He doesn't get paid monthly and then get paid bi-weekly for one. They're all bi-weekly pay periods. His position is all the same. It's maintenance position. The pay rate at each of these jobs is the same rate. Pay $12 an hour. Now, what's significant is the account codes are all different. Now, let's turn, if you can turn in your book to booklet, I should say, to page, let me find that. Page 7, step 3. Like I said, we're going to skip around a little bit. So step 3, determine if some earnings can be merged. Now, if we came in here and we saw, hey, Sam only has one earning, then we could skip step 3 because a lot of this doesn't apply. One of the main focuses on this is to reduce the amount of earnings for your employee. The more earning, if possible, it's not always possible. And so as we see these 3 rows of earnings listed, each earning has to be maintained. Every time you have a change that's going to affect this employee, if he gets pay rate raise, if he changes position, if a number of changes with withholdings, you may have to, you have 3 different items to maintain. If you can reduce that down to 1 earning, then you've cut the time it takes you to reorganize this by 2/3, right? If you have 50 employees that are all set up like this, you can reduce that time. You can reduce your time quite a bit whenever there's a major change to your employee setup, or that would affect all of your employees. So if you look again on page 7, it notes in bold, merging involves deactivating one or more of the earnings and applying an account split method to the remaining earning. So that's so again, that's the main focus, to reduce not only the earnings, but other items if we have multiple items that are unnecessary. Well, let's see if we can do this. Number 1 says reasons to merge earnings, when the only distinction between 2 or more earnings is the pay description, and that's this right here, the pay description and the appropriation accounts that the earnings are paid from. So here we got the appropriation accounts listed. Then you can merge the earnings. Well, so far, so good. We don't see any distinction between, except for the description and the account codes. And a concept I'll introduce here is that you'll be able to, the software has the potential to split one earning among 3 different account codes rather than having 3 separate items for those earnings. So we'll take a look at that. But first we're going to look at this in the display screen before we make any changes. Excuse me. So I'll click on display. And here we've got, I selected all 3 of those earnings. Notice the 1 of 3 message down here. We can move between hourly wages number 1, 2, and cemetery there and back. So notice in this screen, now I'm in a separate window, and we've got this dollar sign indicating that this is the employee earnings subform. And it's in the display mode, meaning I can't accidentally make a change here, so I can safely move around without doing any unintended damage. So here I can see more detail. Like again, what I want you to focus on at this point is that we've got these other tab pages within the earnings. In this earning, so in here we can actually look at withholdings from within the earnings screen. There's not much we can do that in the screen besides assign or attach the various withholdings to be deducted from this particular earning. And so the point being is that it shows us the relationships between those earnings. For instance, here I can see that this Medicare is going to be deducted from when I pay the hourly wages 1. And if I scroll over, it stays on that tab, and I can see that that's also true for hourly wages 2 and hourly wages 3. So Sam has all of his withholdings are attached or assigned to all 3 of his earnings. So we really don't need to change that relationship. But look at the accounts, though. That is where Sam has differences between the earnings, and that's the each earning has a different account code. All right. Another thing is, so you're going to evaluate this. If you look on page 8, step number 4, it says evaluate the employee's earnings and assigned items. So before you actually take any action, you're going to decide on if they're, like for number 1, decide on which other items, if any, to deactivate: withholdings, overtimes, leaves, etc. Well, should I deactivate any withholdings? Now, deactivate in the software, notice the deactivate button over here in withholdings. Actually, it's on all of these screens where we have items listed. We'll have a deactivate and an activate button. Deactivating hides that item and prevents you from including that item, whether it be an earning or a withholding, as part of an employee's wage in future wages. So even if we used an item in the past, within the current year, if we deactivate it, it won't be available to be used on our next wage. And sometimes we want to do that. So as one thing that we can evaluate is take a look at the withholdings. Now notice federal and state, UEN provides the tax tables for federal and state taxes, and whenever the employee gets paid, federal and state are always automatically calculated and taken out when necessary. And so there's really no options to edit that. But Medicare and OPERS are listed, and this is the withholding subform for Medicare and OPERS. And we'll look at this a little bit closer, but I just wanted to show you that you would analyze this more closely and make your decisions before you take any action. So with Sam, that's all we have is earnings and withholdings. We've determined that there's no withholdings to eliminate here, no unnecessary withholdings to eliminate, and that the Medicare and OPERS are attached to all 3, or assigned to all 3 of his earnings. So no matter which one he gets paid, those are going to be deducted. Those items are going to be deducted from his check. So that's good. So really the only thing that we have to do for Sam is determine if his earnings, if any of them can be reduced. And as we've seen, the only distinction between these 3 earnings is the description and the account codes. So based on our checklist, we can reduce these 3 to 1 earning and increase our efficiency in the future when we pay and make changes to for this employee. So that's what we're going to do. So if on step number 5 in the checklist, it guides you through that on the top of page 9, deactivate items that you will merge. And notice the order is important on that page. It says, and I'll flip there real quick on the screen. One more page. Okay, deactivate items that you will merge, if any. And sometimes you can't, there aren't any, but in this case, Sam doesn't have any other items that he has or would deactivate. So we can go ahead and deactivate earnings. Now notice the asterisk. Following this order can avoid unintentionally hiding relevant items by the active filters on some forms. So the order is important. You're always, if you've got other items, you're always going to deactivate the earnings last. That way you don't hide things that you might need to see in the various perspectives. All right, so back to our screen. How do we deactivate these? We're going to select two of them and click on the deactivate button. Simple as that. Now they're hidden in the background. And they're not gone. If you accidentally deactivate the wrong one, notice that you can select all or inactive. I'll select all. And it shows all of them. And I could reactivate them, or click on the activate button to get them back on my active list. Again, deactivating means they are prevented from being used on wages in the future. All right, so I'm down to 1 hourly wage, and now I'm going to edit that because, if I just, sure, I'm down to 1, but now I'm going to charge everything to the gas tax fund, and really I want to distribute his wages, his earnings, to 3 different funds for Sam. So I need to make some edits to this. So I click on Edit, and I can change the description. Notice the hourly wages 1. That was something that carried over when this was converted back in 2012 and 13. We had 2 different hourly wages. Each description needs to have a unique name, so the system automatically named it hourly wage 1 and 2. We don't need that anymore. We only have one earning now. So we'll take care of that, real easy. And then we'll look at the relationships between the other items. And as you can see, all that Sam has is the withholdings, and those are attached. So we want to confirm that they're attached and they're active, that the status is active for each of those. Now, the account codes aren't exactly what we'd like them to be, but we'll handle that later. And then the next tab in the center here, we've got the Accounts tab. And it was set to the gas tax fund, one of the 3 accounts. Now we want to add in the other 2 accounts that were previously attached to the 2 other hourly earnings. So we'll go to the data entry line, click on it, and it gives us a list of all of our available account codes. And if you start typing, this is a neat trick. If I type 2, it's going to narrow down everything with the beginning with the 2. And then one of my accounts is 2041 for cemetery. And then it really narrows down my account list, and I can pick the account that I'm going to use for this. And click on the insert row arrow to pull that up to my account list. And now I can add my next one, which is 2171 in this case. And pick that account code and click enter or insert row arrow, and it pulls it up to my list. Now if I try to save this change with the save button, look what happens. Oh, I got that pesky red dot. It's a warning. It's saying, hey, this item was not saved. Only one appropriation account can be selected when you have the no split method. Well, what in the world is the no split method? Well, the no split method, notice it says one only, if you can see that. Again in 2013, when this converted for all of our customers, all of the earnings were set to no split, because in the old software you could only have 1 account code per charge per earning. Well, now in the new software you can split it up just like we've had to 3 different account codes. But you have to choose one of these split methods, the 3 remaining split methods: manual, percentage, or hours. Well, what are those all about? Well, I'm going to explain them, but if you forget after watching this video, all you have to do is make it to this edit employee form and click on accounts and click on this little question mark. These question marks can do no harm. They're extra information, and often they'll give you a nice brief explanation of this particular screen that you're in. So I'm going to click on the question mark, and look at that. We've got no split, manual, percentage, and you get a nice paragraph explanation to remind you of what you learned in class today. So take advantage of that, please. So under the account split method, we have the first option is manual split. Notice that not much changes here under manual. The nice thing about it is I can save it, and I don't get that red dot anymore. Well, what does manual split do? Well, when I go to pay this hourly wage for the employee, when I'm ready to add my transactions, if it's going to list these three account codes, and I can enter the number of hours that the employee works. For hourly employees, this is typically a pretty good option because, at least what I've encountered, is that most hourly employees, their hours vary from paycheck to paycheck. And maybe the departments or the funds that would be charged for the particular hours will vary as well. Even if they do get paid for 80 hours every 2 weeks, they may have worked in different areas, and you just don't know how it's going to be distributed until you get their time card for each pay period. So a manual split means that it works well for those hourly employees because it just simply lists all the potential account codes. It'll show up for each of the account codes as 0, and you simply type in 0 hours, and you type in the number of hours they worked and which account code should be charged for the various hours. Just because an account code is listed does not mean you need to use that on the wage. Maybe, for instance, Sam works all in the position that he works for a particular 2-week period should only be charged to the gas tax fund in certain circumstances. Then you could have these account codes set up under manual split. When you go to pay his wages, you can put all his hours into the gas tax fund. So list as many that you may potentially use in a given, in the year for his wages. All right, the next method is percent split. And that's typically not the best option for hourly wages because you're plugging in a percentage amount for their earnings that will distribute their hours by a set percentage. You still type in the hours, but it'll distribute it by the set percentage every pay period. Typically for hourly employees that varies, but maybe for some salaried employees, you might have some that always have like a 50-50 breakdown or by thirds. So I could put in, for instance, something close to split 3 ways here. It's got to add up the bottom to 100, 100%. So this is not the hours again, this is the percent split of, let's say, the 80 hours that an employee works. So it'll apply that split and distribute it out among these various account codes that way. It could be anything you choose here, but it could also be something like this. Maybe typically it's a 50-50 split, and then occasionally, this is for us a Parks account code. Occasionally Sam does some work in park maintenance, but not often, maybe a few times a year. And so in those particular paychecks on the wage, you could edit his account codes that are going to be, and the hours are going to be charged. But let's say most of the year, 50 paychecks out, not 50 paychecks, 20 out of 26 pay periods a year, it's split evenly between cemetery and gas tax. Then this would be a convenient option. Again, usually that's not the best option for your hourly employees. One option that may be helpful for some hourly employees, if you do have some that typically always work a set number of hours, like in this case 2-week period, and it's distributed the same way, the hours option, split method I should say, when you click that, it'll open up this hours column, and you can type in for an 80-hour week, perhaps this is the breakdown for Sam. So that might be helpful for a few of your hourly employees, and some of you. But for Sam, we're going to keep this on, and again, this can be edited. Maybe there's one pay period out of the year where Sam wouldn't work this many hours, or a few weeks, and you can edit this at the wage level, but set a preset default for each wage on the screen. But for Sam, his hours vary quite a bit, and so we're going to leave it on manual split. Okay, so I can save that and now close the screen. And notice how we've got 1 hourly wage split 3 ways. Nice and easy to see on our list of earnings. That's kind of what we're shooting for. Now let's come back. We're not finished though. We're going to look at our other items, and for Sam, that's just withholdings. And we're going to take a look at Medicare and OPERS. Now, when we list Medicare and OPERS, this does refer to the employee deduction, yes, for Medicare, but it also refers to the employer matching portion for Medicare. So I'm going to click on Medicare first and edit. And notice it lists that on my screen. I've got a different icon here, the percent sign for my edit employee withholding. Notice in the first section it shows the employee share distribution, and that's the 1.45%. And then at our township we don't have a fringe benefit, which I'll get back to that in a moment. So that's 0. So we meet our employee deduction with the regular plan of 1.45%. We have an earnings tab, like I said before, and this shows us the relationship between this deduction and the earnings listed. Now what really matters is the active earnings. We've deactivated 2 of our earnings, and so it doesn't really matter that this is attached to the 2 inactive earnings. It won't be deducted twice or anything like that because we can't pay these earnings if they're inactive. The important point is that we reconfirm that this is attached, this Medicare is attached to the active earning earnings that we will be paying in a given pay period. And so this would be a bad scene if it was just attached to inactive earnings. We would want to correct that if we saw something like this. So it is attached, and so it will be deducted when we pay our wages. Now I can move on to the next tab page right here, appropriation accounts. Notice it says employer share. So that's that matching 1.45% that the township pays on behalf for Sam when he pays Medicare. I'm sorry, when we pay the IRS for his Medicare withholding. So here we don't just want to charge the gas tax fund, and we can split the employer share in the same way that we split the earnings. We can split the employer share, and we want to do that for Sam. Now notice also we've got one of those blue question marks here, so that's a good thing to click. We click the blue question mark. It's going to give you a nice explanation of the no split method, the percent, and the object split method. So starting off with the percent, this works the same way that as we saw with the earnings. If I wanted to add my account codes, I'll just add one of them here. The what was it for Sam? 21. So for instance, the Medicare that applies for the park, you can see that I could put in, for instance, a 50-50 split or whatever is applicable for as percentage split. Now I think this is going to be, in rare cases you would want to use this. This would be if no matter how your earnings are split. Remember, Sam split multiply between 3 different account codes. No matter how your earnings are split in a given period, if you have the employer match set to percent, it's always going to split that 1.45 matching portion by the percent that you set here. So I suppose there could be some of you that have a need for that. Most of you, I think you're going to find that the next split option is ideal if you're going to split up your employer match by different account codes, multiple account codes. and that is the object split method. So I'm going to select that, and notice when I select object, it gives me this little drop-down menu. And in there, it lists object codes, the third component of appropriation, fund, program, object. And it's going to list, for instance, Medicare in townships, that's object 213. When I select object, look what happened. It filled in 3 account codes, in this case, for me, in my list. And these account codes, when I pay IRS for Medicare, for this employee's wages, the matching portion will be charged to these 3 account codes. Now I'm going to show you something on the screen. I'll try to be slow about this so you can see it. Now, see how we've got the main this is the main employee screen open, and we've got the withholding detail screen for Medicare open. I'm going to go to the main employee screen and click on the Earnings tab. Just to remind you of those 3 earnings we had split for his hourly wages. Notice the fund, the 3 different funds and the program codes. If I pull this kind of side by side, oops, see, I knew I'd do that. Let me pull this as close as I can without expanding the screen. You can see the relationship between these. I've got when you choose the object split, what's really sweet about this is that your employer share distribution will follow, as we say, the earning distribution. So if my earning it'll follow the earning distribution that in which it is attached to, all the earnings that it is attached to. So this is attached to the hourly earning. And so I can see that 2021 330, notice the fund and program is the same as 2021 330. Same thing for 2041 410, and 2171 and 610. So it followed that and distributed it to the 213 Medicare object code. So it created that on this list. So when I pay that earning, it will also record that I owe the IRS for the matching portion for the employer share on these account codes and distribute it proportionally exactly as my hourly wages. All right, so that's how that works. Now we'll see how that you can visualize that when we go to pay the wages. I'll demonstrate that. Now the next tab page is Appropriation Accounts Fringe Benefit. The same principle applies with fringe benefit. Now what is a fringe benefit? Some of you probably may have no idea. In the live class webinar that came up, a few questions about that. Well, let's look at our Details tab. A fringe benefit is not something that you as a fiscal officer will take on your own to make a change for that. That's something that would be legislated by your township, village, library, special district, and approved by whatever agency that the fringe benefit is provided. The fringe benefit says, for instance, if I had that 1.45% that's normally withheld from the employee, what if my township covered that portion as an extra benefit for the employee? So they have nothing regarding Medicare withheld from their check. That would be a fringe benefit, or maybe a portion of that. We've got 1% here, and maybe 0.45% is paid by the township. That's an extra benefit that some, not too many, employees get at different governments in Ohio. And that is not, again, something you wouldn't take on yourself. That would be something that would be legislated, and you don't want to get that wrong, because that is there's some other tax benefits that go along with that. So be careful about you don't want to make any changes out that without having the proper authorization. But most folks with Medicare just have the regular plan where they have 1.45 deducted from their check, and then a matching amount is paid by the entity. And so even though we don't have a fringe benefit for Medicare, there is a technical requirement in the software that you have to have at least one account code assigned to fringe benefit in case you ever get that benefit for employees. Well, that's fine. What we recommend at UAN is that if you don't, if you do have the fringe benefit, that you set this up by whichever account code you want charged. But if you don't, we recommend having the exact same split method as in the account codes as your employer's share. It makes it easier to see on some of the various lists that you'll look at. It's good to be consistent that way, since you have to have something there anyways. So that's what we're going to do with our fringe benefit distribution for Medicare. Again, it doesn't affect anything for our particular entity because we don't have that benefit for our employees. But I'll go ahead and save that. And that's the last thing we need to fill out. I'll click on Close. And now we can see, well, I'll have to go back to withholdings on our main screen. And now we can see the employer and employer fringe benefit is set for Medicare to this 213 object. That's sort of a visual cue. If you could just look at this list and you can say, oh, it's set to the object split method because an account code is not listed. That's what the X's and 213 is all about. OPRS is not at this point, so we need to take care of OPRS. And so we'll go through that a little quicker. Good, OPRS G. We do not have a fringe benefit for OPRS as well. Again, that would be something you'd have to have legislated, and you'd have to have that. OPRS would need to be approve that and set up a special plan for fringe benefit or salary reduction plan. And that's something you would take on yourself that gives the employee a special tax benefit. So only if you have those plans would you put anything on this screen, okay? I can't emphasize that enough, that you would not change this to fringe or salary reduction unless you're absolutely sure that your employee should get that benefit, that it's legislated and approved by the agency such as OPRS and set in place, and they're aware of that. Okay, so we got the regular plan, the 10%. I'm going to click on the earnings, and we see that it is attached to the active earning or hourly wages. I look at the appropriation accounts employer share. I'm going to change it to that to the object. The object code for OPRS here is 211, and it'll follow my earnings. And then I'll go to appropriation account fringe just to set that the exact same way to 211. And now I can save it and close. And now it's really easy to see that split. Since I don't have any other items here, I am done. I've got them split, both of these withholdings and earnings split and consolidated, and so I can close my employee form. And now we'll take a look at what that looks like when we're doing a wage. So payroll, transactions, wages, and I'm going to add Simple Sam, which I'm sure you've all done before, adding wages. So we'll click that reminder message. And he was in the maintenance department, so we'll select that. And then he was a bi-weekly employee. We'll advance his pay period and find him on the list. All right, one wage is saved. And then we'll go and close that and open the edit form right away so we can take a look. All right, here's Sam. Now, as you can see, he doesn't have any gross pay yet because he's got the manual split method. We need to enter his hours. So this is going to look different if you don't have any employees that have consolidated earnings. Then you've never seen this before on wages. Normally you would just have the account codes listed using the old method. But now that we have split this 3 ways, we split it with the manual split, it's going to list the split method here, and then it says split method, manual split plus to edit. Well, if you could see me, you'd see I'm clicking plus and nothing's happening. Well, this is one of those odd things that, or it's one of these things that's difficult for our programmers to give you a full explanation in this short column width here. But what they're trying to say is that you need to click the plus sign that's next to the earning. Notice my hourly wages got this little bitty plus sign there, and that's what they're trying to communicate by saying plus to edit. So I click on the plus sign. See how my accounts are now listed? I click it again, it collapses and expands. So you'll have to get accustomed to doing that if you're going to make edits to the wages. And so I need to put in his hours. Remember, it's biweekly, so we'll say he worked 80 hours this time. And I'm going to distribute that. We'll start off with 40, 20, 20 here. 80 hours. And it'll subtotal it for each account and then total it up here based on the rate calculation, 960 gross. Now normally that's all you would need to do. Now notice that now this will differ depending on the split method. For hour, if you have an hourly split method or percent, this top line or row, you might be able to type in the number, like say for a percent split, you would type it in and it would distribute this amount. For manual split, you have to type in the individual rows. You'll have to just kind of get used to that. And then, and there's no harm in practicing that before you save. Now, normally what I was going to say is that this is all you have to do, right? You wouldn't take a look at his withholdings. They just calculate. You've got it all set up. But for class purposes, I'm going to show you how this distributes through his withholdings to demonstrate how that object split works. So we're going to click on the withholdings tab. Maybe you've never done that before. And this just kind of gives you a display of what's going to happen in the background. We've got here the first section is employer withholdings and employee deductions are listed below. There's no need for us to look at the employee deductions right now in our demonstration. But the employer withholdings, well, that's where we set up that object split method. So we'll just look at OPRs in our example. And notice that just like with the others, we don't have an account code listed because this is split between account codes. The total amount is $134.40 for the employer match for OPRs, 14%. This is telling us, click the plus sign to view or override the setting. You shouldn't have to override this. But we'll click on the plus sign and see how that expands. And then we got to go down to the various earnings. Well, Sam only has one that this is attached to. And so we click on the plus sign for hourly wages. Maybe I'll make this full screen. It's kind of big there, but so here it lists the hourly wages. And notice the object split method. Okay? Excuse me. So it tells us this is the object split method and shows us the distribution. I'll jump back here to the earnings again. So we can see the manual split, and 50% of his hours went into his pay is from the gas tax fund, and the other is split 50-50 between the other account codes. And that's how the earnings follow for the matching portion for OPRs. Because of this really sweet object split method, we can see $67 is half of the match. So it'll always follow. Now, let's say in a particular pay period, Sam gets paid, everything he worked should apply, the hours he worked should only apply for the gas tax fund. So for the entire 80 hours, so I can zero out these two, and the entire 80 hours applied in his earnings to the gas tax fund in this particular 2-week period. If I click on the withholding tab, all of my matching hours are also, or matching pay, I should say withholding match, is now all set into that one fund under the OPRs account. So see how that follows the earning. It's a really nice feature in the software. So we really, really encourage you to use object split method whenever possible. All right, so that's all the changes we need to make for Sam. I'm not going to actually post his wages. Just wanted to demonstrate what that looked like to you. And so now we're done with our first employee, and we'll take a look at a more complicated employee. Okay, before we continue with our next example, I want to make sure I mention something I forgot to mention at the beginning of class, that if your employees, if you make extensive use of cost centers, remember in accounting we have the, for appropriation accounts, you have 3 required fields: fund, program, and object, and some fiscal officers or entities make use of the optional cost center feature for your appropriation accounts. If you use that and you use it for payroll, for salaries and hourly wages, for earnings, and the accounts used there, if you use that, that's going to complicate things quite a bit for you. I don't think there are a whole lot of entities that do that at UAN, for at least for their employees' wages and the earnings, but or even I guess the matching portions too. But if you use cost centers, well, it gets more complicated than that, and I recommend that you contact UAN support. It's something we really can't go over in the video. But now if you use it only for accounting transactions and it doesn't have anything to do with your payroll, that's not what I'm talking about here. But if you're using it in your payroll setup and make use of cost centers, do not go forward with this checklist and start entering changes, because you're going to end up, well, causing problems for yourself. I won't go any further than that with your payroll and the distribution of accounts. Things will not be charged the way that you would like them to be. You'll have to make some adjustments to the way you budget if you're going to take advantage of these, if you're really going to take advantage of these system enhancements that we have in our current software. So that's just a side note I wanted to say before we move on with the more complicated setup here. All right, well, you know at UAN, if you've been to any of our courses, we like silly names. And so I've got, for one of our employees, Fragmented Frida is one of our employees, and she's got a fairly complicated setup. Actually, it's identical to Steve Friendly. They work the same positions, basically the same hours and same distribution. The difference is that Steve already has his maintenance has already been rearranged. This employee has already been arranged to take advantage of the efficiencies in UAN. Whereas Fragmented Frida, well, she's still very fragmented, and it's got a lot more going on than what we saw with Sam. So I promised that we would follow the checklist when we do the next one. So if you, in your book, if you turn to page 1, one of the first things that you want to do is print the Employee General Information Report. So we're going to do that first real briefly for Frida. We'll go to Payroll Reports and Statements, and then Employee Reports. And there's the Employee General Information Report is the first one in the group of reports under Payroll Reports and Statements, Employee Reports. And so I'll just select Frida somewhere here and click on Display. But I'd recommend you really print it out for your employees. Frida's pretty complicated. She has a lot of earnings. And the full disclosure here, Frida, in my example, does not have any kind of leave benefits, although in my data, I had initially set this employee up with sick leave, vacation, and did some transactions, and so it's going to show up on the reports, and we might see it hidden in the background there in a few things here. But it has no effect on her setup. So in pretend world here, just bear in mind, the only thing that Frida has is hourly wages and overtime benefits, and of course, withholding deductions. So you can see this is 5 pages. I really don't want to camp out on the report itself. I just want, at this point in class, I just want you to understand that it shows everything related to that employee that's set up in the employee maintenance screen. So you can look at it on paper, and as you're reviewing and going through the steps, you can write out notes before you make any changes on this. All right, so I'll close employee reports, get my menu list back to employees, and I'm going to select both Frida and Steve. We may at some point we're going to compare and contrast them. All right, so in the checklist, now notice on page 7 of the checklist, you turn there, I've got a bunch of reminders here. A number of these points I've hit already in class, and I'm going to discuss it, hit most of them. This would be really good, again, the first few employees you do, to read through this thoroughly and get a grasp of these concepts. And if you don't follow them on paper, come back to the videos to review before you move on. All right, step number 3 at the bottom of page 7, determine if some earnings can be merged. All right, well, let's take a look at the components of Frida's setup. So we've got her earnings, and, well, in fact, she's got quite a few earnings here. Now, we'll analyze in a second whether these earnings can be merged. Again, we're not actually merging them here, we're just assessing. Now, remember, now let's take a look at 7 again. Number 1, reasons to merge earnings. When the only distinction between 2 or more earnings is the pay description and the appropriation accounts of that the earning is paid from. Well, if you take a look at this, again, we see here that the accounts are different and the description is different, but description is not significant. We can change that. The frequency is exactly the same. The type, they're all hourly wages. It's not a salary and an hourly. It's hourly wage for all these items. The pay rate for Frida is exactly the same for each earning. However, her position information is different. Now that's not insurmountable, but we'll have to look at that in more detail in a little bit. Let's look at, so we're going to move on to page 8. The top of page 8, it says reasons not to merge earnings. When the earnings have different pay types. Okay, this one does not have different pay types. That's good. I already mentioned some of these. Different pay rates. So let's say if when Frida works for road maintenance, she gets paid $17 an hour instead of $15. Well, then we could not combine that earning with the other 3 earnings because of the pay rate. You can't. That would be a deal breaker right there. They have to be the same pay rate. All right, pay frequencies. Well, we couldn't merge 2 or more earnings if they were different pay rates. If this was a monthly and biweekly combination, you wouldn't be able to. They would have to be separate earnings for that in that situation. All right, if they have different withholding deductions attached, we'll take a look at that in a moment. Different leave accrual for the same type, we'll take look at that much later in class. And then lastly, these 2 different items, different position names and different departments. And we're definitely going to touch on those. For right now, we'll look at step number 4, evaluate the employee's earnings and other assigned items that are assigned to these. What else could be assigned to this? Well, we've got overtimes for Frida, and we see that Frida does get paid. She gets paid overtime, but only to one account code. Now, if we were to dig down, we might see that really when she gets paid overtime, maybe it should be distributed to more account codes, but out of convenience, the fiscal officer didn't want to set up 4 different overtime wages, so he just set up one overtime wage, and whenever she needs to be paid out of a different fund, he just changed that account code, adding work to his schedule, or maybe incorrectly just charging the one account code when others should have been charged. Who knows? There could be a lot of situations. Or you might come in here on one of your employees and you see 4 different account codes. So you'll run into different situations for different employees like this, but key thing is here, it's not really ideal, as you'll see. Now, Frida does not have any non-cash benefits. She doesn't have any leaves. Now, if we look at withholdings, look out. We've got a much different situation than with Sam. I'll expand this to full screen. We've got 4 different Medicares. One Medicare corresponding to every account code in her earning, every fund and program in her earning. And the same is true for OPERS. You see there's 4 different. So notice that they're labeled 1, 2, 3, 4. The same thing is with Buckeye Village income tax. Now the others, supplemental federal, dental, these miscellaneous withholdings, there's only a single one of those for Frida in this case. Now why do we see this? Well, again, it has to do with that conversion back in between 2012 and 2013, depending on how the employee settings were arranged in 2012 and how complicated it was. Depending on that, it could, the settings converted over to the new software differently. So in Sam's case, all of his 3 earnings, in Simple Sam's case, first example, his 3 earnings were all attached to Medicare. The Medicare was attached to all 3 of them. And that was just the nature of how it was set up in the old software. The nature of how Frida's items were set up in the old software created this mess, I will call it, where we have 4 different items, 4 different Medicares corresponding to the 4 different earnings that she has, and so forth. Whereas with some of them don't have duplicates. So, and you'll see this most often with Medicare and OPERS. So we've got some cleanup to do here, and there are some of these. Now again, depending on how things are arranged, you may or may not be able to remove or deactivate some of these items, but we're going to do our best. The more that you can consolidate the 4 into just 1, if possible, or maybe 4 into 2, if that's not possible. Whatever the case may be, reduce the amount of items, reduce the amount of earnings to the minimum. You have less to maintain in the future. All right. So we'll take a look at Frida as compared to Steve Friendly. Now notice I've got 1 of 2 employees listed here. So here are earnings. When we click on this, it's going to bring us to Steve Friendly. And notice how he's already been reorganized. And see how much cleaner that is, just like with Sam. He's got 1 hourly wage and 1 position, maintenance. Let's take a look at this again. So for Frida's earnings, look at her position descriptions. Hall maintenance, road maintenance, cemetery maintenance, park maintenance. Well, the position information is a little bit tricky, and I think on page 2 or 3 of the booklet, like I said, you want to read that over because the position information is not something that UAN provides. That's something that the fiscal officer will type in when they're setting up the earning for the employee, or that maybe was set up a long time ago by the previous fiscal officer. But it's something that you can customize. But there's a big if there's no legislation or policy that dictates the name of employees' positions in different areas. Now let's say if there was legislation that whenever an employee works in this particular area, they're in this position, or there's a policy that says it's got to be marked with, road maintenance or cemetery maintenance. Well, that would be a deal breaker. If you look back at that step 3, we could not merge those earnings if we had to maintain, I believe the way it's worded is, if there are different position names that the entity determines are important to retain. So if we have to retain these position names, we're not going to be able to merge the earnings. I suspect that in many cases, that a lot of our customers that are in the situation don't have legislation or policies in that place. That's something you're going to have to determine. But if policies aren't dictating this, like is the case in the case with our fake Buckeye Township, then you can choose a generic position name. For instance, like here we have maintenance. It's essentially what Steve does is maintenance, whether it's park or cemetery or in the township hall or the road. So we can name that position maintenance, and then that frees us up to combine those earnings, or potentially frees us up to combine those earnings together and simplify our settings. There are many, this could be called, a worker, you could call labor. So as much as possible, simplify your employee positions descriptions if you can. If not, there's no legislation that's prohibiting you from simplifying it. Simplify it, your position names, and therefore you may be able to consolidate the earnings because of that, if all other things are in place as well. All right, so let's look at another comparison. If we look at withholdings for Frida, very complicated with all those extra Medicares and so forth. If we look at Steve's, nice and clean. We've got Medicare. It's got the object split method for Medicare and OPERS, like we saw with Sam. And we've got his Buckeye Village income tax. There's no matching portion, so it's just, there was no real need to have that, the village income tax separated in 4 different ways. So, very nice. Another thing with Frida is she's got overtime wage, and man, that should really be split out between different account codes, but the fiscal officer just didn't know of a way around it before and just charged gas tax fund. Well, now that he's reorganized Steve, very nice. He can distribute whenever his wages to his overtime wages when he earns them to the different account codes that he needs to do on that particular wage. So that's our goal with Frida, and we can tackle it, I'm sure. So we're going to go back to Frida's settings, and we still got some evaluation to do. I haven't hit one of our major points here, so I'll select all of her earnings and click on Edit. And so I can just page through here again. Here we've got, notice that, well, I'll get back to this. Let's see. We'll skip over leave because she doesn't really have leave. And we've got her withholdings and then accounts. So we've got that one account for the hourly wages 01. What I want to focus on right now is the position. I mentioned that we could change this to maintenance. Now you can type in, once you type in a description, it'll be available to pick from our list. So let's say I want to change this, like I said, I change it to maintenance, and I already have Sam set up as maintenance, so I could just pick it at a list. But I just want to show you, you could change this to work, whatever even if it's not on the list, you could type in something for it. Labor, whatever this description that you need. We'll choose maintenance. And then I'll just save that. Oops. Yes, we're going to get a message because of that. There's taxes. So actually, and I don't really need to rename these now because I'm going to deactivate 3 of them. So I'll just go ahead and leave it for now. The other thing I want to focus on, though, when I'm in here is the departments. Now notice for each of these, Frida's got a different department. We had road, in the first one it was administration, road, cemetery, park. Now it may be true, it is true that our in our fake Buckeye Township that there are several departments. But for payroll purposes, you don't necessarily need that many departments. The purpose of departments in payroll, they're used to sort employees' earnings into groups of wages to process together. It just makes it a little bit easier to group employee when you larger entities, mainly larger governments, if they want to group employees not just by their frequency like monthly or biweekly, but if they want to group them by certain departments and pay them at different times, or just in smaller batches, that's you could include them and segment them off by departments. That's the only reason in payroll that we have that as part of our earnings, required field of earnings. It's not really it's a nice benefit for those larger entities to maybe break your employees down into 2 or 3 or maybe 4 departments. For those of you who have 100, 150 employees and in different departments and so forth. But for if you're a small village or whatever, maybe you do have some departments, but it's really not a huge advantage. We really recommend simplifying your departments for payroll purposes. Now, on page 2 and 3 of the booklet, it does describe departments, and so I encourage you to read that over. I'm going to show you where you can briefly show you where you can change that. It's in the book, so you don't have to worry about this. But you can go to General Maintenance Departments, and if you need to add a generic department, for instance, when we started reorganizing our Buckeye Township, we had these departments here, and really fire and EMS has to remain. But in administration, maybe is a good setup for us. But the cemetery, park, and road departments, it was really not necessary to break that. We found that it was not necessary to have that many departments when we could just call them the maintenance department. And that's advantageous for payroll, because now that doesn't prevent us, if we can change them all to the maintenance department like we had with Sam, then we can group all those earnings together. If we, for some reason, have to really separate them by departments, then it's going to prevent us from simplifying our employee setup. I don't think in most cases that you really do. Now, I want to point out that we have other modules in the software, like inventory, for instance, where it'll use these departments settings. And if you take advantage of inventory, the inventory module, you would want to have all of your real departments listed in the screen and use them in inventory for different reasons. But in payroll, there's nothing preventing you from having a separate list within this list for the payroll purposes. And so what I'm getting at, especially even for some of you small entities, townships and villages and so forth, if you've only got 10 employees, you could add a department, just one department, call it payroll, and assign all of your departments to that all of your employees' earnings to that payroll department is one potential option. Or maybe but the point here is not necessarily that you would have only one. You could call it wages, whatever you want to call it. That makes more sense. But maybe you could just have administration and maintenance, whatever fits. But the point is to minimize the departments so that you can streamline payroll whenever that is possible. Whenever you can minimize them, it's better. All right, so we're going to return to our earning with Frida here. And I'll get back to my checklist page. All right. So while I'm in here, let's take a look at our different, we've got our 4 different wages, and I'll just change this back to what it originally was, hall maintenance for now. And we don't really want to implement any changes here until we go through. So we were evaluating everything, and let's see if I can get myself back oriented around this. All right, so we do our evaluation, so we're still in the middle of that. So one thing that we're going to find, and I'll go ahead and save that. I'm going to get a message that I won't bother explaining that right now. If we look at our withholdings, I want to focus on this. Now notice that hourly wages number 2 is assigned to the Medicare 02, OPERS 02, Buckeye Village income tax 02, and notice that all of our other miscellaneous deductions are attached. Now remember, attached means when I have it check marked, these are going to be deducted when I pay this earning on wages. Okay, so if I go to the hourly wages 03, we see that Medicare 03, OPERS, etc., but the miscellaneous deductions are not attached. So it's going to be important that when we get rid of, if we can get rid of 3 out of 4 of these earnings, that we have all the deductions that we need attached to the earning that remains. Okay, so here are my last one, hourly wages 04. Again, there's no miscellaneous deductions attached to that. If I jump back to number 1 here, the hall maintenance, again, no miscellaneous wages attached to that just corresponding to my 1, 2, and my 1s with hourly wage 1. So I'm going to keep in mind that this is probably this is why you kind of assess, okay, this is the earning that I'm going to keep. But I'm going to end up getting rid of, deactivating the other 3 earnings. But first I want to look at my other items, and I'll take a look at overtimes and edit that, and I'll see that in overtimes, I've got all my rates and so forth listed here. I'll see that my overtime wage is attached to that hourly wages 02, and that made sense for because we would want that deducted in the past, all of our deductions taken out when we paid overtime. Notice if I click on a different one, not all of my miscellaneous deductions would be removed. So do that. See how only it's missing the supplemental and the deferred comp, etc. So this setting in the overtime determines the deductions that will be applied when Frida gets paid her overtime wages. And so it's already set at hourly wages 02 for this overtime. And so I'm going to leave that there. And again, another good reason to keep the road maintenance, currently called road maintenance earning, or hourly wages 02. All right, again, she has no non-cash or leaves. And if I look at my let's say, for instance, my OPERS, for class I won't look at all of them. We'll look at OPERS 01 here. We can see that that is attached to hourly wages 01. So if I go to OPERS 02, it's attached to hourly wages 02. So I would confirm all of this and get a good feel for where the employee stands, what is attached to what. And what I'll find, I'll just tell you, is that all of these O2s are attached to my the hourly wages 02. And just to show you one of them, one of my miscellaneous withholdings, you can see on this screen, is attached to hourly wages 02. Now we're just looking at the same thing from a different angle. Before we looked at the earning and saw that when we looked at hourly wages 02's earning, we saw that all of the withholdings that we saw all the withholdings that were attached to that earning. All right, so once we fully assess that, where we stand, and we kind of writing notes all along on our employee general information report, then we're ready to take action. And we turn to page 9, step number 5, and we deactivate items that we will merge. And we do it in order. And so we're looking, the first thing to deactivate is withholdings. So I'll select all of my duplicates here. And one way to do that is I could select all and then uncheck the ones that I'm not going to deactivate. So that would be all my miscellaneous ones are going to remain active, and then all the O2s, so to speak, in my case. And once I've got those selected, I can deactivate them all at once. And now they're hidden in the background. And now, yes, I definitely have to clean up Medicare, but I'm not going to jump ahead. I don't want to go and change the split method or anything. I want to deactivate all of the items. So I would look at leaves. She doesn't have any. No non-cash. No, and she does have overtimes, but she doesn't have 4 different overtimes. So she still gets paid overtime pay, so I don't want to deactivate that. So I'll move on to earnings. And now that's always will be the last thing you deactivate on this step. And so I'm going to select all and then uncheck O2 and deactivate. And now we're down to 1 earning. Step number 6, review the earning in detail, the remaining earning that's active. So we're going to do that. We're going to take a look at our hourly wages O2. We'll review it and make changes as needed. Well, now I can get rid of the road part of maintenance, make it generic. I can change my department to my generic maintenance department. There's no need for all that extra notation for hourly wages. It's just plain old hourly wages. I can look, if for some reason I had, say, the date of the last raise was on his hourly wages 01, well, then I would have to put in that optional information here in my remaining hourly wages. Otherwise, that information, it's on an inactive earning. So you may have to update the details section, but I didn't include that in our example here. And then I'm going to click on my overtime earning. And because I studied everything, I already saw that this overtime is attached to this earning. So no need to attach it again. See how it is attached? It means that it will apply to this earning. No non-cash benefits. There's no leaves. And then withholdings. And because of the way I deactivated and studied it, I see that everything that needs to be deducted is going to be deducted. Not exactly in the way that I want to, because I want to split this up, but I'm just confirming that it's attached. And then I click on the accounts, and I can distribute my account code. Now, for account codes to the 4 different account codes. Now, for Frida, I'm going to choose the hours method because she typically gets paid out of 3 of these account codes in a given 3 of the 4 in a given pay period, and occasionally out of 1 other. So we'll go ahead and add those accounts. Make sure I get the right ones here. Okay, and so I'll sort this by account code, and I'm going to say that most of the time she gets paid half of her hours out of gas, and then split 50-50 between the other, between a cemetery and park, and only occasionally does she get paid out of for the hall maintenance, so out of the general fund. So we would edit that at the wage level on those occasional, on those times. So this will pull in those hours when you choose the hour method right into her wages. And if it's a typical pay period, then you may not have to make any edits whatsoever. So now that we've edited our earning, we can click on Save. That completes step number 6, and we'd move on to page 10, step number 7, Review your withholdings. So I can close the $ form, the earning form, and now it's nice and clean with the account split breakdown, and I'm going to jump past these to my withholdings. So we're doing this in the order as listed in the checklist, and this will be helpful for us to make it most efficient in cleaning up. And so now I've got the Medicare. So I'll take a look at Medicare first. I'll click on Edit, and here I can clean up the name a little bit. O2, confirm that it's attached to the correct active earnings, and then I can click on the employer share, and I'm going to change this to object split. So we'll do that real quick for Medicare, and the same thing for our fringe benefit. And that'll follow our earning, the earnings that we have this attached to, in this case one earning that's active, and save and close. We can select several of these at a time, so I'll just move through these other ones real quick. We'll click on Edit, confirm that it's attached correctly, and for OPERS, and choose Object Split. And then with like our miscellaneous withholdings, we're just confirming that it's attached to the active earnings that we need it attached to. So that's good for Buckeye Village. Yeah, that's our Buckeye Village. That was the one with the duplicate one, so we can take out that O2 and just confirm it's attached to the active earning. Very important. Everything looked good with our withholdings, and now on page 12, step number 8, we can move on to reviewing our overtimes. So we jump back here to this tab and click on the overtime wages. Double check our settings here in details, and then click on earnings. And in fact, we know it's attached to the hourly wages, which is split in 4 different account codes. It has all the deductions that the hourly wages is attached to because of that selection here. So it'll reduce those. We can see it'll split the object split method too here from the screen. All these are active. We go to appropriation accounts, and we're going to say that this is distributed. Because this is overtime wages, we're not going to choose the hourly split like we did with the earnings, because, well, unless we're overworking, we're overworked. Frida's being overworked and always getting overtime every week. We are not going to have a regular overtime pay. It's going to be something we'll manually edit whenever she happens to work some overtime during our busy seasons. So go ahead and put those codes in for that. I believe that's the 120, 190. Now these will not automatically update. The overtime wages split will not automatically update when you update the earnings split. That is not the same as your, not going to operate that same way with the as the object split, because of the possibility that there are some policies where you might get paid out. Maybe it's your policy that when they get paid overtime, they only get paid out of one account code, or 2 different account codes rather than the possibility of 4 different account codes here. So because of the variety of different governments around the state, we did not program it so that would automatically mirror your earnings, like the employer match with OPERS or Medicare or Social Security, etc. So keep that in mind, that if you make changes in the future, you will have to come back here and change your overtime distribution. But as you can see, now we're looking a lot like Steve Friendly. The last part would be leaves, and Frida doesn't have any leave benefits. So we're done editing Frida's setup here. So that's great. And so, of course, we would save this, and I'm going to just make sure I got everything here. We would save this and close it, and we would go and reprint that employee general information report and make sure that you know, everything is set before we go and post a wage. So very important that you review it, and one of the main points here is that you do one employee at a time, and you follow the checklist all the way through for that employee. Again, you saw that we were paying Steve Friendly and Fragmented Frida. You know, previously one was cleaned up and one was not, and that was perfectly fine. What's not fine is when you halfway reconstruct employee settings and then go pay the wages. So you don't want to do several employees at a time, just one component. You want to go follow the checklist all the way through for one employee and move on to the next employee when time is available to do that. Well, you know what? Frida's all cleaned up, looking really good now. Her settings are really organized, and that really impressed Steve Friendly. So here's my little joke. Caught his eye, they work together. So wedding bells, a ringing, and now she's Frida Friendly. Ha ha ha. So results may vary at your township or village, but hey, I'm just saying, you never know what happens when you clean up your employee settings. All right, the next examples are going to be, we're going to get into leaves. I've been avoiding that for a moment because of many people do not have employees with leave benefits. So we're going to cover that all at one swoop there with a few employee examples. Actually, I misspoke. I do want to show one other thing here. I keep mentioning that the employee checklist, that you may or may not be able to consolidate your earnings into one earning. And so I've got an example of employee that's already been mostly reorganized, Henry Hero here, and he's one of our firefighters, and we're going to see something a little bit different with him. So let's take a quick look at that. We're not going to run through the checklist. Like I said, I've already done a lot of work with him. Yeah, but let's take a look at his earnings. Now remember, one of the first things that we do in the checklist is we look at which earnings to see that could be consolidated or merged together. Now on face value, if you look at this list of earnings, you'll see that Henry has 3 different earnings, and it looks like they could probably be combined. I mean, he's got the exact same pay rate. In fact, he doesn't even have, you don't even need a split method. He's charged the exact same account codes for all 3 earnings. Same position as fireman, same frequency, same type. It's all hourly wages by the number here. The description is different, but we already saw that we can pick a generic description. We could just call him, you know, firefighter, and just rename that. We could apply it all to the same department, so he could be in the fire department or fire and EMS. So far it looks good, but I didn't. I've already cleaned up his earnings, and I found that I could not consolidate his earnings. We'll come back to that, but let's take a look at his overtime next. He's got 3 different overtimes. And again, they're all, if he had double time and time and a half, you couldn't combine those two. They're all charged to that one account code. They're all the same rate, base rate. Um, why can't we combine these? It's not immediately apparent. Let's take a look at his, and we can look at his withholdings too. It seems like a pretty simple list of withholdings too. I already did combine his Medicare and OP&F and made it an object of split. If he, let's assume he had several of those. So those look okay, just from a quick look. No reason to prevent us from combining these earnings or overtimes, but for some reason I did it. So let's take a look at why. We got to dig down a little deeper for this. And what we'll find is the reason it's under withholdings. All right. On the first earning, he's a fireman and he works from different stations, which are located around town, and in the general region, I should say. And the first station is Buckeye Station, and when he gets paid for work done in the Buckeye Station, he has the Buckeye Village local income tax taken out of his check. Now I'm going to move on to the next earning. When he works out of the Little Station, he gets the Little Village income tax taken out of his check and not the Buckeye Village local income tax taken out of his check, because the check isn't applicable for work done when he's working out of that station. If I move on to the third earning, Township Station, well, when he works in that station, he doesn't have to have either one of those two taxes applied to his wages when it paid out of that station. So there is the deal breaker for Henry. We cannot, because he has a different group of withholdings, for good reason, these withholdings cannot, we wouldn't combine the village taxes or something like that, and with these two village taxes. That's not a good thing. So that's the difference, I guess, between if you look at the reasons not to merge earnings on page 8, and it says different withholding deductions are attached. We saw that with Frida, she had different withholding deductions attached. She had Medicare 1, 2, 3, and 4, but that wasn't a good reason to have, there was no good reason to have those Medicare 1, 2, and 3, and 4 withholdings. We could consolidate those Medicares. We obviously can't consolidate the taxes, and so it's important that he has these different groups of withholdings deducted when his wages are paid. And for that reason, even though everything else would allow it to happen, we can't combine these three earnings. So we have to maintain them separately. And of course, the same is true for overtime wages. These overtime wages, we'll take a quick look. If we look at what the earnings that they're attached to, again, remember the earnings that they're attached to determines what taxes and other withholdings are deducted. And so if I go to the different ones, we can see that we'll have the different groups of withholdings attached based on the different earnings. In this one, there's no village taxes taken out for the township overtime. So again, we would need that. So there could be a variety of reasons why you can't combine earnings. You won't always be able to do it, but make sure that there are good reasons why you wouldn't be able to do it. Okay, so the rest of this is going to be on leave and how it relates to the employee. We're talking sick leave, vacation leave, personal leave, any type of leave benefit. How you can reconstruct that if you've got a lot of extras carry over from the old software. So if you're one of those entities that has no leave benefits, none whatsoever for employees, then you could probably stop the video at this point, because it's got you've watched everything applicable to you. So for those who do have leave, Well, we just looked at Henry Hero. Let's take a look at him once more. Actually, I had an example that we're going to clean up, but let's take a look at Henry again. Okay, so Henry does have multiple earnings and overtimes. We had to have several overtimes not because of the account codes, but because of the different with taxes taken out for village and village taxes taken out. If we look at the leaves, though, I've already rearranged Henry's settings, and it's complete. But notice that I did not have to have 2 or 3 different holiday leaves, 3 different sick leaves, 3 different vacation leaves. While I did have to do that for overtimes. Well, why is that? Let's take a look at that first. I'll go ahead and select Edit. And if we look at the attachments, that's really the key. So if I see a holiday leave here, instead of having three different holiday leaves, I've got one holiday leave and it's attached to all 3 of those overtime wages. In fact, let me jump here to, it might be better illustrated if I go to the sick leave. Okay, so looking at Henry's sick leave, he has an accrual. Now, many of you folks, you may have 1 or 2 situations like with sick or vacation leave. Maybe your employees get a lump set amount at the beginning of the year or on their anniversary date of leave granted to them, maybe 2 weeks for sick leave and a couple weeks or 3 weeks for vacation, let's say. At our policy at the Buckeye Township is that for sick leave, all of our employees that qualify for leave get 2 weeks of approximately 2 weeks of vacation, which amounts to an accrual of 3.1 hours per pay period for our biweekly employees, like Henry. So in that situation, it's important that we have the leave attached to all 3 of his earnings. So in case he works at the Buckeye station for 1 2-week period, he will accrue that entire 3.1 hours. And if he was only had it attached or associated, assigned to, whatever you want to call it, linked to these 2 earnings, remember we're in the leaves subform, and we're looking at the relationship to the leaves to his earnings in the leave tab. And so if this was incorrectly attached just to do these 2 stations, again, if it was in one of those situations, or maybe it was incorrectly attached to just the little station, if he did not work at the little station in that 2-week period, then he would not accrue his leave properly. He wouldn't accrue that 3.1 hours. So it's important for Henry that we attach it, according to our policy, regardless of where he works. If he works the hours, works in that pay period, he should accrue that 3.10 hours every 2 weeks. And so that's why one of the reasons we attach and assign our leave to earnings. However, that does not dictate your withholdings. If we look at his withholdings, we see that currently he's going to have the little village income tax when leave is paid. So that was leave accrual. I earned so much per period. But what if he cashes out leave? Let's say he takes the full 2 weeks. It's full 2 weeks off. Poor guy. He's really sick and had to take 2 weeks of his leave in one period. Well, the way this is set up right now, he'll have the little village income tax withheld. And why is that? Well, it didn't just happen by chance. It's based on this setting right here, this WH setting. Because we can assign, and we have the advantage of assigning, we don't have to have 3 different sick leaves. Because we have that advantage, we can assign it to all 3 earnings. We have to designate one of those earnings with holdings, and that's what the WH stands for, with holdings. So based on this selection, it's going to withhold the group of withholdings associated with the hourly wage for the little station. And so notice what happens to my withholdings if I change it to the Buckeye station. I've got a different group. The Buckeye Village income tax will be applied when I pay that sick leave as opposed to the Little Village income tax. Or if I choose the setting for Township Station, then neither the Buckeye Village or the Little Village income tax were withheld because it's going to follow or pay that sick leave based on this selection, not because we've attached it to more than one earning, and so we have to tell the software, hey, where is this going to come from? Now, a very, very common phone call that we get at UAN is something like this. Notice that none of the WH selections are selected. I can save this, and it gives me a warning message, but a lot of times these can end up being ignored, unfortunately. You get a busy day, it's understandable, distracted by other things in the office, a lot of things are on your plate, and so you may miss this message or not fully understand the implications of it. But if we say yes to this warning message that you did not select a WH earning for this paid leave, and you get a question, are you sure you want to do this? You will not be able to post wages until you do so. And so to continue without selecting, select yes. To select an earning before continuing, select no. Well, unfortunately, a lot of folks will say yes to that message, and then you're not going to discover the problem. I could say yes, continue, and we'll move on to vacation leave. And then you could just, I could, whatever, make any changes I have. It'll allow me to save that and move on because maybe I, need to check into it. So the possibility I need to check into it and make the selection later. But, it's a possibility if Henry's one of those guys who's generally pretty healthy, doesn't take a lot of sick leave, and then I could go on for a while and not, potentially not notice if I got a lot of employees. And then when the time comes when he does take a day off, and I'm for being sick and wants to claim that sick leave, I would go to his wages and discover, hey, there's no place to pay that sick leave for Henry. So that would be a problem. That's typically we get calls like that saying, hey, I don't see sick leave being accrued. I don't see sick leave being paid. I can't pay it. What's going on here? And this is where we would take you first and say, okay, let's take a look at this earnings tab. So I jump through that. You would go to the employee main screen here, go to leaves, and go to sick leave in this case, and edit. And in that subform, at employee leave, you would find under the earnings tab, you have to make one of these selections. Now you're going to have to determine which selection makes the most sense. Our reasoning at Buckeye Township is that Henry actually resides, his address is in the Little Village, and so and there's no based on our local legislation, our tax rules, it's okay for him to have that withheld when his leave is paid, his sick leave is paid. So when we've selected the Little station, oh, notice by the way, if I have no selection, it doesn't have any withholdings that would be withheld if I paid sick leave. Software is not going to allow for that, so it's not going to allow you to pay sick leave until you choose one of these earnings. And then um, it fills in the void there with what will be withheld when you pay that leave. Um, but that is something you're going to have to determine based on your local taxes. What is permitted when you pay sick leave? What should be withheld when you got these more complicated situations where you have different groups of withholdings? Which group should be withheld? But once you determine that, you got to make sure you select that. And so this is why you're going to assess, another reason you're going to assess all of this before, I'll go ahead and save and close that, before you reorganize. Leave is, if you look at the checklist, leave is one of the last things you do is to reorganize leave. And this is why you may, if you're at a stopping point where you're not sure about that, don't start reorganizing everything else, so the earnings, the overtimes, the withholdings, until you figure out the full picture, and then go ahead and enter the changes. Because you don't want, again, you don't want to halfway change this. All right, so I'm going to leave it at that with Henry. The same situation with his vacation and holiday leave. And so that is the distinction between that and overtimes. Overtimes, you have to assign an overtime for the purpose of withholdings to a particular earning. And with the leave, it's a different situation because the need for accrual. And so you can't attach that to several earnings, and versus overtime where you can only attach to one earning. Just the nature of the item. So we're going to look at a person who is partially reorganized. That's Victor Vacation, appropriately named. We'll click on Edit, Advanced, and Victor has the same very similar setup to Frida and Steve Friendly. He works similar position, and so if you look at his earnings, I've already cleaned up his earnings and distributed it to those 4 account codes. He's changed all, he's in a maintenance position. His overtime is already reorganized so that he has it split 4 different ways. I've already arranged his withholdings and attached them properly. One thing I haven't done is his leaves, and you can see he's got quite a bit. He's got one he carried over from the previous software, a separate leave for every account code. Remember how Frida was set up with 4 different account codes, 4 different earnings. And so the way that Victor was set up is he had 4 different vacation leaves for every one of those 4 earnings. Same for sick, holiday, and comp time. So he's got all this extra information to maintain when typically we can probably consolidate all this into a single leave for each of these types. Now I want to point out for demonstration purposes that we would have already deactivated, we would have determined if we could combine these leaves, we would have deactivated 3 of the 4 of each type at this point. But since for demonstration purposes I wanted to evaluate this separately, I left them out. But really it would have been better in the real world. That's why you want to follow the checklist, and at this point you would have already deactivated. It would have made it less cumbersome when you're rearranging the overtimes and the withholdings as well. So looking at the leaves, let's just take a look at his sick leave and dig down to the edit screen for that. So we're going to look at sick leave and open up those 4. So he's got sick leave 01. And let's notice a few things here. The policy is the same for all employees that get sick leave at Buckeye Township. They accrue approximately 2 weeks a year, 3.10 hours per pay period for our biweekly employees. Victor should as well. But notice how his accrual is set up here. It's at 0.78. What is that? Well, if I page through that, all 4 of his leaves are set up that way. This is something that our prior fiscal officer set up after the transition to the new software, to manage through, or maybe in the old software was managed this way, actually, I would say, to manage through his accrual. And this could be different even though for each of your employees setup might not be this way, but somehow they had to manage through these 4 different leaves. And the way he had it set up here, the fiscal officer, was to split that 3.1 hour accrual among the 4 different sick leaves, and did that for all of the other, for the vacation also accrues. And so that the potential for error there can be very great. Again, what if Victor works in one of those areas where the general fund or something is charged? Maybe he works in an area in that 2-week period where only the gas tax would be paid, and he takes a day off, and when he gets paid that sick leave, when he gets paid for his hourly wages, even before this was cleaned up, he would have only accrued a fraction, 1/4 of what for sick leave is what he should have accrued. So you could see different things here. Maybe the fiscal officer might set this up so that all the accrual would have just come out of one of these. And there's a lot of things, and so the potential for either error or having to go and do leave balance adjustments to adjust this and to get it to the right balance is just very great when you have it set up split between these 4 earnings. So we're going to have to, so there's a good reason to clean this up. Now another thing I'm going to point out, I'll jump back to his sick leave 01. Let's look at his earnings. Well, he's got this earning, attached to the hourly wages 01. And this is probably one of the earning we want to deactivate, or the sick leave we want to deactivate, because we deactivated the hourly wage 01. That withholding is not going to withhold his, if we narrow this down to just one sick leave, it's not going to withhold everything that needs to be withheld when we pay that sick leave. If we look and notice the WH there. So let's move to the next sick leave 02, and that's attached to the one active hourly earning. So that's good. It's attached to an active one, and the withholding is selected. The WHID there. Notice we could maybe see a problem here and say, oh well, that's not selected. That would be the same problem we saw with Henry. So we'll select that, and that's what determines the group of withholdings. And here all of his miscellaneous withholdings are included, and in his case the Buckeye Village income tax would be withheld when he gets paid. I'm sorry, he does not have the same, he doesn't work in different stations like Henry. I was confusing the two employees. But his miscellaneous withholdings are included on this sick leave. If you scroll over here again to the next sick leave 03, his miscellaneous withholdings are not included, and the same thing for 04. So the ideal sick leave to remain active and use, if we're going to consolidate these, is sick leave 02. So we can, if we were to look at all of these different ones, just to let you know, we should look at them, but for the interest of time, I'll say, let you know that all these correspond to the 02 types. So because we were able to consolidate the earnings, and we knew we were consolidate over the overtimes and some of the withholdings for Victor, we know that we can consolidate the leaves. That, again, I reinforce, the checklist is organized in such a way that you need to make these assessments, you need to analyze this before you start making changes. If you just came in here and started consolidating your leave from 4 to 1, you might find out that, hey, maybe I can't really consolidate my earnings down to just one like I thought I could. So you don't want to start with leaves. You want to keep them in mind, but you don't really know if you can combine all of these until you look at the whole picture. So you're going to do all your evaluation in the checklist first, write it all down on that employee report, and once you figure it out, then you follow the checklist in order, and the last thing again is leaves. So we'll take care of that now. We're just going to select all to make it easier and choose all of the O2s to remain active. So we got all the O2s selected of this group, and we'll deactivate the rest. All right, so now we can, we'll start with sick leave, and we'll reallocate. We're going to reorganize that. We can take care of this extra notation first. We want to apply our accrual to 3.1 hours whenever they work in that pay period, because otherwise, if we forget that, it's not going to accrue right. We might even want to put in a maximum leave balance and maximum annual accrual for some of these, now that we have just one. The earnings, we want to confirm that this is attached to the hourly earnings. Now, if somehow if this was not, we want to make sure it's active and attached to the correct one, and that withholding selection is made so that the proper withholdings are grouped together. If you found you made a mistake and you deactivated the one that does not include your miscellaneous withholdings, then you're going the wrong hourly wages, then you're going to have to make some adjustments there. So again, that would be if you did the checklist out of order. So we did a checklist in order, and so we're in good shape here. We've got all the active withholdings. But again, you look at all these areas to confirm that because mistakes can be made. And then we'll look at our count codes, and that's what we need to split up again, because we only have one account code since we consolidated. So we're going to change this one to the percent method, because a lot of times that works well for leave. And so we're going to, let me get my count codes. All right, I've got my 4 account codes, and I'm going to distribute this. We'll just say evenly. And so if sick leave is paid in a given period for, let's say, 8 hours of sick leave, all I have to do is, when I'm at the wage, I could put in on the first line for the sick leave, I could put in 8 hours, and it'll distribute that 2 hours apiece, or 25% through for these 4 account codes, or however I set up the percent breakdown. So that's one option. You could choose manual and just type in the number of hours. We're going to stick with percent. It often works well with leave. And then click Save and Close. And so you can see the consolidation there. So a few little extra notes. We don't have to reorganize all of these for class. But perhaps you consolidate your comp time, and you find that you want a maximum leave balance, but you've never been able, they weren't able to do that before because you had 4 different comp time leaves. You can put it here that this will limit a maximum, your maximum leave balance to 25 hours. So if you accidentally grant a 26th hour for that employee, it's going to while doing wages, it's going to pop up with a message saying, hey, this person has been denied the 1 hour over because it's not, you've limited that balance. Your policy, this is all dictated by your policy. I'm not saying you should enter this in, but in our township, comp time's limited by 5 hours of a current balance, or maybe an annual accrual. So let's say 40 hours. You could have a total accrual for comp time of 40 hours, but at any given time you can't have any more than 20-hour balance in the sort of leave bucket for comp time. So there are some options you could take advantage of perhaps when you reorganize your leave that way. So I'll go ahead and save that. And since we've got a little bit more time in the video training, something I didn't have time to show in our class, I'll show you a neat little trick here with the account split. You notice how I've had to key in all of these accounts if I want to split this 4 ways. But it's really not absolutely necessary. If I happen to want to charge the exact same accounts when I pay out comp time as what I use for this hourly wage, well, I'll show you this trick. I'm going to just delete that row. That's what this little X is for comp time. And so now I've got no appropriation account designated for when I pay this earning. If I click over to the earnings tab, and then I click back, notice how the WH selection, of course I only have one earning here, the WH selection is selected, and there are multiple account codes on this earning. There's 4 of them, as we've seen. If I click back on that appropriation account tab, it gives me this neat little message. It says, will this leave be paid from the same appropriation accounts as the WH earning selected in the earnings tab? Remember that column, the withholding earning. And well, yes, it will. If it should only be charged to one account code, maybe based on policy, it's always charged to the general fund or something like that, if your policies dictate that, then you would say no, and you wouldn't actually bother doing that, going through those steps. But in our case, yes, we do want to distribute it that way, so we'll click on yes, and it's going to copy over the split method and those 4 account codes, and it saves me a little bit of time. A few little clicks instead of answering the question appropriately will save me the time of using the data entry. So that's a little trick that you can use when appropriate for yours, and it speeds up things if you've got a lot of these to do. So again, it's going to look at this WH setting. If I didn't have that, I couldn't use that trick. It doesn't do me any good. So I've got to make sure I select that WH setting, and then I get that message. When appropriate, say yes, and then save. For vacation leave, I'll update this to, I believe it's 6.25 for Victor. It's got a nice deal there, 4 weeks of vacation. And we want to split that up as well. Alright, so Victor is all cleaned up almost. And he's good to go. Alright. Now, with vacation, with any kind of leave, I should say, I've added a section in the back of the book, page 16 and 17. And for anyone who has leave and is going to be reorganizing, it's very important that you read those 2 pages. There are a lot of considerations with leave. Now, for our example so far, we've attached the leave, I believe for both of our examples, if I look again at Henry and Victor, we've attached the leave. Well, let's take a look at Victor here. With Victor, we've attached the leave to all of his earnings because we wanted to accrue that amount, and could be because he could be paid out of potentially just out of one of those earnings. I'm sorry, I said Victor, I mean for Henry Hero there, our example. For Victor, I believe it was the same thing, except he only has one earning, so we have to attach it to one, so that's what we did with him. There are some cases where you may not want to attach the leave benefit to all of your earnings, and you're going to have to evaluate that on a case-by-case basis. So I included 3 different examples. There could be a lot more variety at your different the townships, villages, libraries, and districts across the state, but it's something you really want to consider because you can cause problems with your employees if you don't evaluate this closely. And I'll just give you one example in class, and you can read over the others. We've got seasonal Sarah seasonal, and Sarah actually doesn't work just seasonally. She's got 2 earnings. I've named them very descriptively so that we can they'll stand out for us. We've got her year-round hourly wages as an administrative assistant, and she gets paid bi-weekly for that year-round. She also gets paid about 3 or 4 months a year. She works for the pool and gets a very set salary, or a set salary of $150 per month. So she's got 2 different earnings of 2 different types, but she also gets leave benefits. If we look at her leave benefits, she gets sick and vacation, and we'll take a look at her sick leave. With her sick leave, she accrues like everyone else about 2 weeks, 3.1 hours per pay period. So that adds up to about 2 weeks for the year. Now, when we evaluate how she's set up, this is an example. This is not set up correctly. If you look at this, she's got this leave item attached to both of her earnings, which means that she's going to accrue leave whenever she gets paid for either one of these earnings. Now, if she gets paid with one check, so she gets paid bi-weekly, she's going to accrue 3.1 hours, and that's good for every time she gets paid bi-weekly. When she gets paid for her monthly salary during the summer, as long as she gets paid on one check for both her normal bi-weekly job and her seasonal job, it won't cause a problem with her leave accrual. But what if she gets paid a separate check for her pool earning? Let's say our fiscal officer is in the habit of paying for those seasonal workers, just paying them in one group in a separate check. So he cuts a check for his normal employees and biweekly employees and cuts those checks, and then he goes and he does all of his seasonal pool employees, and he cuts a second check for Sarah. Well, that means she's going to accrue an extra 3.1 hours. Actually, for every month that she works that job, if she cuts a separate check, she's going to accrue that extra. Well, there's going to be potentially a finding and recovery there, because we're going to over grant her that sick leave benefit, and she may not catch that. You may not catch that, and it's going to a problem. She'll get essentially overpaid for that. There's another problem with this, in that the WH selection, the withholding selection, is on the pool salary. And so these 4 withholdings, that basically the retirement and taxes, are going to, when sick leave is paid out, it's only going to withhold these taxes and the retirement, when in reality it should withhold her normal deduction. So in December, if she takes a day off for sick leave and she gets paid for that, if it's set up this way, it's not going to withhold her normal deferred comp and health insurance and so forth. So again, it's a case-by-case basis, but in this case, we're going to have to unselect the pool seasonal salary and just leave it on the year-round hourly wages. That way it accrues properly, even if she gets paid a second check for pool salary, and also whenever she's paid out that sick leave, it deducts the correct withholdings. So very important. There are other examples in the booklet that you want to look on page 16 and 17. Take a look at it, 16 and 17. I'll go ahead and save that. Another very important thing that applies to everyone with leave, and this is returning to the Victor, our example in Victor Vacation. With Victor, remember how we consolidated those, those, like for instance the sick leave. And remember how he had his earnings, his earning accrual split 4 different ways between 4 different sick leaves. And I should have mentioned it right then when we were in there, I forgot, but that's a problem because he's been accruing it on these 4 different items. And let's take a look at his leave balance. It shows us his leave balance of 101 hours. Well, in reality, so when he has 404 hours of accrued leave because he accrued a little bit on each one of those different sick leaves. If we try to pay out more than 101 hours of sick leave pay for Victor, he's going to be out of luck because on this sick leave because we don't have enough in the bank for this particular leave item. We've got to take some measures right now to adjust his leave and establish it. Now again, the fiscal officer may have handled it differently for your employees. It might have been done properly or improperly. You want to make sure you're going to have to really evaluate what is the leave balance and is it accurate. So this can get a little bit tricky, but we got to get it right. So we're going to take a look at payroll utilities leave balance adjustments. And I want to first point out that this is one thing that we did not include in this handout, the leave balance adjustment as part of that checklist process. So you want to make a note about that for those of you who have leave. Make a note that you may have to do leave balance adjustments if you have a really complicated reorganization for some of these employees. So look at this and make a note. It's not in the booklet. So we select on leave balance adjustment. We get a normal message saying, hey, you've got to document this if you're going to make changes because this is like taking away cash benefit or giving a future cash benefit for this employee. Leave is essentially like cash. So we'll click OK. And then we've got the option to adjust leave balances by employee. So we're going to select Victor, and it's going to show us all of his leave balances. He's got quite a few. So we'll focus here right now on sick leave. If we look at sick leave, at least our fiscal officer did keep track of the balance accurately and did split it 4 ways. So that we'll give him that. But again, the only one that's going to remain the ongoing sick leave of our merge is this one right here, the sick leave that's not labeled with the numbers here. So we've got to reduce the other sick leaves. So we'll put in minus 101 to 0. So you put in a minus sign for the one that you're reducing, ones that you're reducing. So those are reduced to 0. And then we need to add $303, not dollars, but hours. That's what we're looking at here, a positive number, to our remaining sick leave. So that our revised balance is what it should be. And that's, of course, the same thing for our remaining comp time that is 25 hours. He's at the max, and we'll reduce the others. Of course, you would scrutinize this very closely. Holiday leave is paid as they go, so don't need to correct that. He has no balance for holiday leave. But vacation leave, we'd want to consolidate that. Oops, I want to decrease, not increase. Sorry, keep typing in the wrong numbers. Minus 51.25. So that's $153.75. To bring us to the balance that it should be for vacation leave of $205 for Victor. So once we get that in, we would date it, we've made our adjustments, and then we'll, today's date typically, and then we put in a meaningful note. I'll just put a short one here, reorganized. Probably the better way to do it would be maybe to do these one at a time, and then you could say we merge 4 sick leave items to one, and whatever the case may be for each of these, and then you could post them, and that would be a record on a leave balance adjustment report that you could show your auditor, explaining why you're doing this adjustment, because they're going to want to know, and it may stand out for that year. But that's good. That's something that you've got the purpose there to document it and give yourself, you remind yourself 2 years from now, hey, why did I do this when you're being audited? It'll be a reminder both for you and information for your auditor. So take advantage of that purpose field, and all that you need to do there is post it. Whoops, maybe that doesn't even out. Okay, we've got, oh, I see. I don't increase it by 25, I want to increase it by 15. Yeah, all right, so that my balance is the maximum of 25, and then post. All right, so that's how you would adjust leave. All right, some final thoughts about reorganizing employees. Don't do this at the end of the year. Or at the very end of the year during your busy time in December or January when you're first, when you've got a lot going on, or during holiday seasons. But it's worth doing. So during the slower time in your annual schedule, you can start reorganizing. And again, that you can reorganize your simplest employees first, your simplest setup first. You can do them one at a time. You do not have to complete all of your employees before you go and do payroll. As long as you go through the checklist all the way through with everything applicable for that employee and in the order that it's organized, you'll be in good shape. Complete one employee, and that way you can schedule your time to do this. It could be a big job for some of you if you've got a lot of employees and a lot of complicated setups, but you can take it and break it down to small chunks and get this done. It will be worth the effort, I promise you. Another note again about those who incorporate cost centers, you're really going to have to contact UN support and talk about that if they've got cost centers incorporated into your employees' earnings or withholdings and so forth. So, yeah, also, anyone who's in the middle of this, if you're working on it, you can, again, starting with your simple employees, if you have any questions, feel free to call UN support. You can rewatch portions of this video. And the final thought about those who have leave, if you do need to consolidate some leaves of the same type, like we saw with sick leave, and with the Victor vacation example, you do really want to pay attention to your leave balances, not covered in this booklet, but you may have to make adjustments so that you have the accurate leave balance on your active leaves that remain, and that you have a zero balance for the leaves that you've made inactive and are no longer relevant. So that completes our recording. Thanks a lot for your time.